With all the blinding distractions of the leadership battle, will today's caucus vote let the government get back to the business of governing? For a business take on Labor's bloodletting, I spoke a short time ago to Paul Espey, founder of the Pacific Road Group and chairman of the Australian Infrastructure Fund. Paul Espey, thanks very much for being with us.
It's a pleasure.
Now, you're a veteran of the mining industry with background in banking and infrastructure. Is the business community convinced when Julia Gillard says that the government today is back on track?
Business people come from various directions on the big issues of the day. I can state the obvious and say that the one thing business people have which is consistent is that they want to see stability, they want to see rational development of policy and the implementation of it. I would argue that, broadly speaking, what's led up to the events of the last week doesn't meet that test terribly well.
And so the federal election isn't due until around the end of next year. Will that be long enough for Labor to prove that it has got its house back in order, or do we need an early election?
I'm not a political commentator, and I'm not particularly familiar with the inner workings of the Labor Party. All I can say is that we've got a situation in this country at the moment where a minority government, a function of which can be successful in some countries, has not worked particularly well here. And I'd go so far as to say that it's because the tail has been wagging the dog. I can't see why that's going to change as a result of the events of the last week and today.
Is it something about Julia Gillard's leadership that concerns you?
I think there are rather higher level issues, frankly. Going back to the first announcement of the carbon tax, the first announcement of National Broadband Network, the early parliamentary announcements of that, and the general running up of debt that has been something we've lived with through the last 2 to 5 years. Those things are of major concern to the extent that they are done on the run. And I can tell you that internationally, a sequence of the things that have happened in our country through that period has made the rest of the world ask the question, what's going on in Australia?
So do you think it has damaged Australia's reputation overseas?
There's no doubt that the perception of Australia as a stable, well-managed country has come under some real threat. I was in the United States in my business talking to institutional investors at the time that Julia Gillard acceded to the leadership of the Labor Party and the Prime Ministership. It came as a real shock to the Americans. Some of the tax and other initiatives and the running down of the credit balances of the country and the debt that's gone with it have really made the rest of the world wonder. Here we are, the lucky country in many respects. We're enjoying much better economic health, but it's being run down.
Well, there are many in the business community who are calling for an early election. Are you among them?
We have a system of government. We do rely on the confidence of the public. The confidence of the public, I think, has been given a bit of a run this last week. That is to say, the public are asked, and we as a country, thank God, we accept the results of an election, and we expect a government to have the power to get on, formulate good policy and administer it. That has not been the way of things in the last while, and as I said, to the extent that the tail wags the dog in Parliament in Australia presently, I can't see that being solved. So, do I think there should be an election? I don't think it makes a huge amount of difference what happens in the next 12 months. I think we've in prior times seen opposition pressing for elections a bit ahead of their own interest and the stability in the country. My personal inclination, though I'd like to see the issue of government with authority resolved would be to perhaps let it run its course, which doesn't necessarily mean run to the end of the term of the current parliament.
So what does it mean?
It means that that's a very good question. It means what comes of the position that the independents have taken, the tail wagging the dog, as I call it, and of course it's not just what happens in the House of Representatives, but it's what happens in the Senate. How do those powermongers resolve their role relative to the Prime Minister and her cabinet?
So you think the question of the leadership of the Labor Party is far from settled?
Well, I think the authority of the leadership has been seriously questioned, and it hasn't suddenly been put to bed today.
Now, there's a lot of talk in the business community about the lack of productivity growth in Australia. To what extent do you believe the Labor government's workplace reforms are to blame?
I reflect back in the times when I was involved in some of the bigger mining projects and their financing, to the time when Charles Copeman set about putting Robe River back on sound footing. And at that time, the relationships between the companies, their management, and the workforce in the Pilbara was pretty diabolical. In subsequent years, enterprise bargaining and the rights of the individuals at work to strike their own deals with their employers brought about spectacular improvements in productivity. And we've been living on the fruits of that in all the subsequent years, I suggest. And to constrain that process where individuals can make their own choices. In the cities, we see this problem that the limitation on relationships between employers and employees restricts the ability of individuals to work when they're able to work between their studies or between other jobs. And I don't think that's a good thing for individuals, let alone for the people who seek to employ them and for productivity in the system as a whole.
So would you be looking for something like a Work Choices Mark II?
Once again, I'll deny profound knowledge of the particular policy area. My interest is in the rights of individuals to strike their deals with their employers and vice versa, and that's been impeded by legal process, and history shows that it's not very helpful in this country.
Now, I have to ask you this, Paul Espey, because a lot of people watching this might say, of course you would criticise this government because you are a significant donor to the Liberal Party.
Yes, I have been. Is there something wrong with that?
No, but I guess for some people it might put your comments in a different perspective.
Well, I'm not here to criticise the government per se, and I think if you reflect on what I've been saying, I'm not making a party speech here. I'm answering your questions as a business person with a serious interest in what's good for our country. I have children, I have grandchildren, I have a lot of friends, I have a business that employs people. I'm interested in the policy issues. That being the case, I'd put it to you that the business community, and you know, setting up these interviews, is riddled with people who have a particular interest in a particular policy, or because of their corporate labels, they're unable to speak out. I've reached a stage in my life where I can talk to an issue, and I pride myself on doing that in an objective way. You can make your own judgment about that.
Paul Espey, thanks so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you, Emma.